I was just saying that it's my pleasure to introduce you to Elenore and Magnus Kristoffersson from Örebro University. Most of the people here at UNISE know me in my capacity of research consultant for ESERI, but I also have a position at Örebro University, which is a sort of medium-sized university in the middle of Sweden, which I was going to say is in the middle of Europe, but it's not really. It's in the northern Europe. I'm not going to say so much more about Örebro University. All I really wanted to say was that Elenore and Magnus are colleagues of mine from that context, and it's really fun to have you here. It's not the first time they're in Seychelles. They were actually here in just over a year ago, and established some connections then, and they will further those connections now, I believe. And the topic of the day is very recent and relevant research on AI and how it can be used in tax interpretation. Yeah, sort of. But they will tell you all about that. So without further ado, welcome. So.
Thank you for the introduction, Mats. We'll just try to share a PowerPoint here. Maybe you want to introduce yourself first.
Should I start?
You can start.
Right. Well, my name is Magnus Kristoffersson, and I work at Örebro University, as Mats said. I'm a lawyer, and I defended my thesis in 1999 at Uppsala University, which is the oldest university in Northern Europe, actually. It was founded in 1477 from the beginning. I made a deviation for like 20 years in the private sector, working as tax advisor and legal advisor in different positions, mostly with mergers and acquisitions. And since 2018, I'm back at university, Örebro University. So I joined Eleanor's group, which also just happens to be my wife. Because that's an older crime, going back to university.
Yeah.
And so I normally say that I don't have any hard times making decisions in life. Because at home, she decides most things, and at work, the same thing. So it's really easy life, for me. What more to say about me and my research? Well, I'm rather much into question around digitalization, technology, and law. I'm also really having interdisciplinary interests. I've been working a lot with people in business administration, psychology, what more? Social work, different areas, computer science. We have a really fascinating cooperation with a Japanese team in computer science and business administration, actually. Rather close to this, what we want to present today. I think that's enough about me at the moment. Please address questions later on.
Yeah. All right, so I'm Elenore Kristoffersson then. And I met Magnus in 1999 when he had just defended his doctoral thesis, and we got married in 2000. So we've been hanging out together for a very long time. And I defended my doctoral thesis in 2001, and that was about value-added tax. And we're going to talk about value-added tax today as well. So that is one of my special subject. So I continued in academia, became an associate professor also at Uppsala University in 2003, and then I became a full professor in 2009 at Uppsala University as well, but then I moved to Örebro University in 2010. I've been there since then. I'm responsible for the research of the law subject there. So that is sort of my administrative task, but I prefer most to do research and teach, I would say. Shall we go ahead?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, maybe we should present the topic here.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So what we're going to tell you about today is a project called POLINE. And the heading of the project is using AI to retrieve and analyze juridical principles of law within the context of value-added tax litigation. Yeah, all right. And how do I change? Just like, no? So, yes, but we start with an Örebro picture. This is Örebro castle right in the city center. The university is divided upon into 3 campuses, and we and also Mats are at the main campus, which is a little bit on the border of the city, and then we have 1 campus for the medical doctors close or in by the university hospital. The nurses are not there actually, they are at our campus, but the medical doctors are there. And then we also have 1 campus for tourism and culinary arts, which is like 1 hour drive from that. So, yeah. So we are first going to present a research project for you. And then we are going to talk about the 3 different parts out of which it consists. And then, well, merge this together, because that is sort of the project, the relation between VAT, legal principles, and AI in the POLINE context. Do you want to take this one? Because I'm going to take a lot of value.
All right. What is POLINE then? Well, it's a international corporation. We were actually invited by the University of Bologna in Italy to participate in the project. Other partners, are they coming later on? No. Well, it's also University of Turin and University of Florence that are partners in the project, and it is also a Bulgarian company, and that company is a data provider company for the legal sector. So what they actually have collected is a lot of data, legal related data, and then we give access to it to Bulgarian lawyers, tax lawyers, and officials, and so on. And what this project aims at is, in easy way to say that we are trying to develop an algorithm based on artificial intelligence. It's now described, and we will come back to that, as a so-called NLP model, or natural language processing. In fact, we are touching other areas as well. A rather new one, and that is generative artificial intelligence, of course, we could use. But what we will do is actually to collect a database of case law. We will try to take this case law or text as a data training set, and for the purpose of the algorithm to identify legal principles in these cases. So what are we talking about? We are talking about something that would be possibly used to recognize legal principles in different legal texts, and the legal area that is chosen for it is actually VAT. Should we say something why they choose VAT?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, Well, VAT is, as you probably know, or if you don't know, it's harmonized within the European Union. And it means that we have rather similar legislations in between the countries. By that, we have a local, on national level, we have VAT laws, but at the same time, we have on the European level, common legal system framework by which these principles are similar. And the idea is that if we compare Italy, Sweden, Bulgaria, and with the European Court of Justice case law, then it would be a sufficient data set actually to train this algorithm at the end of the day. So that's in general. And the expected outcome of the project, what we hope to do, is to find a robust and trustworthy use case of AI technologies for justice. So the main idea is that this kind of technology, or what we are developing, could be used for legal practice in general, and not only limited to VAT. And I think that is fully possible. It's one of the steps to reach a non-discriminatory and effective access to justice. And this is mainly the idea behind using technology. I don't know if you're aware of it, but lawyers, we are, at least in Sweden and Europe, rather well paid, a little bit expensive to hire, and key factor to have access to justice is actually to have a competent lawyer. Otherwise the risk is really high that you actually lose the case. With this kind of tools, it's hopefully a possibility, sometimes at least, to get rid of these expensive lawyers, or to make it easier to understand. The project also aims at assisting judges in assessing legal knowledge, reducing the work overload, make life simpler for a lawyer and a judge, of course. Allow recipients of VAT measures to identify judicial principles of law applied in specific case and assess whether VAT law is correctly applied. Now it comes down to more narrow around the VAT as such and not the general principle. And by developing open assessed automated techniques of knowledge extraction, the methods developed can be easily reused and expanded to include other fields of law and other legal system. And this comes to our main assignment as a researcher and research institute, and that we of course is financed by EU Commission funding. So that's the open access part. So the aim is at the end of the day that everyone will gain benefit of what we develop in this project. All right. This is the partners, as I mentioned before. And then you can see that the company in Bulgaria is APIS Europe.
No, is in Italy, I think.
Sorry?
No, is in Italy.
Yeah. We just changed country because we find pasta and olive oil much better than old meatballs. I don't know. It might be an error by the algorithm. All right, and it's quite, I think it's okay funding for this project. It's a 2 years project, and the total funding is like 700,000 euros. So it's okay. Here, I think you are more into the different work packages.
Work packages. All right. Well, this is just from the from the project that well, we have started with the project management and coordination. So we have met in Bologna, and because the project started in 1st of January, so it's quite new. So we have done the first work package. And then we are now working with the second one, legal analysis and knowledge representation. And we are part of work package 2 and work package 4. And then the University of Turin, they are the ones who have the computer scientists. So they are currently working with work package 3, which regards then machine learning and NLP analysis. Then when we have constructed the pilot tool, then we will move to work package 4 and present it and demonstrate it in Sweden. For instance, we had an endorsement letters from the Supreme Administrative or the Supreme Tax Courts in all 3 participating countries. So then we will demonstrate the tool for them and then test it and disseminate it then in the end. And oops. This
is the consortium.
Yes, gathering in Bologna.
Yes, this is actually University of Bologna.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think it's that much more.
Yeah. All right. So, as you saw, the project consists of 3 parts: the value-added tax part, the technical part, and the principles part. And I will tell you a little bit more about the value-added tax. And value-added tax, that was proposed by a German business person in 1918, William von Siemens. So he was one of the sons of the founder of the German company Siemens. And he suggested it, and his half-brother Carl Friedrich von Siemens, he also developed the value-added tax system. And tried to have it introduced in Germany, but it didn't succeed. So the value-added tax was finally introduced fully in France in 1954. And then in the EU, or what was then the EC, the European Community, they came with the first and second value-added tax directives in 1967. So, and what they did then was that they decided that value-added tax was the way to have the general consumption taxation in Europe, because before that, the different member states, which were not so many from the beginning, only 6 of them, but they applied different systems. So, for instance, in Germany, they applied a turnover tax, which was levied in all stages of all stages in a transaction chain. So as soon as goods were sold, then first in the beginning it was 1.5%, and then later 2 and 2.5% tax was imposed on that. In other countries, they had a sales tax when you sold goods to consumers. So that you only levied the consumption tax in the last stage, when you actually sold goods to consumers. And in France, and they had already the value-added tax system. And the system that was introduced in the EU, then by the first and second value-added tax directive, that was not the French system. It was a sort of merge between the different, and it had, of course, influence, but it was a kind of merge of the consumption tax systems, but designed into value-added tax. And today, value-added tax applies in approximately 170 countries. So it is quite a new tax, and it has spread very rapidly. And here I have the value-added tax map, and I think that maybe some more countries have got the value-added tax after this one. But what we can see is that I know that Bahrain, I think they got a value-added tax, and the United Arab Emirates got one quite recently as well, and also I think Qatar is about to introduce a value-added tax. So it's something in that region. It's happening quite a lot. Syria has tried to implement a value-added tax, but it has been too politically unstable to make that happen. But the big economy that does not apply a value-added tax, that is the US, they have their general sale or their sales taxes or use taxes imposed when you sell goods and services to consumers, and it's also not harmonized within the US, so they have different taxes on district and state level. Right, and then the EU value-added tax then. As Magnus said, we have this harmonized system, and that means that all the different member states, they have their own value-added tax acts, so they have their own national legislation, they have their own national courts that apply the value-added tax, but there is a common system. And the national courts, they can refer a case to the Court of Justice of the European Union to ask about the interpretation of the value-added tax directive. So you can never appeal to the Court of Justice of the European Union, but the national court refers the cases and asks about the interpretation of the common system. But I said that it was it is six countries from the beginning which formed the European community: the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Germany, Belgium, and Italy. So that is where the European value-added tax started, and now it has spread to all the 27 member states of the European Union then. And also UK has, I mean, their system is, since they were a member until Brexit, their system is, of course, very, very similar to this system. Okay, so what happened then with the value-added tax? As I said, we had this Wilhelm von Siemens in 1918, which came up with a prototype of value-added tax, but there was also a parallel development in the US by an economist, Thomas S. Adams, and he also developed a value-added tax system. But if you read Thomas S. Adams' texts, then you might not. It's difficult to see that this is a value-added tax, and the reason for that is that, at least in theory, it is considered that there are 4 different ways to design a value-added tax. And what Adams did was that he had the additive direct method, and that means that you take the tax rate and you add the wages and the profits, and that is what you tax, and that is sort of the value added created in the company. And there also in theory there is an additive indirect method, as I know, or as I have found in my research, or I have not found that in my research. I don't think that a country has applied that one. What Wilhelm von Siemens invented was the subtractive direct method, and that is when you take your output transactions, that is your sales, and you deduct your input transactions, that is your acquisitions, and then you tax the net value of that. And this system was also the Japanese system is the only system in the world that has actually used a kind of this subtractive direct method, which made them not having to have invoices for value-added tax purposes. You know, when you if you buy something with value-added tax on it, it is you take the sales price and you add the value-added tax and you get a receipt where it's the sales price and the value-added tax. But in Japan, they didn't need to have any value-added tax invoices because of that they also that they use the subtractive direct method. So they could still calculate the value-added tax like that, but they didn't do it transaction for transaction as we do everything everywhere else in the world. But in October last year, also Japan introduced value-added tax invoices. We have the subtractive indirect method then, and that is what we apply. You apply it, we apply it in Europe, and that is when you like would declare your value-added tax, then you take all your output transactions and you take the value-added tax on your output transactions and you deduct the value-added tax on your input transactions. And that was what Carl Friedrich von Siemens also suggested. What happened then with the early value-added tax? Well, France started already in 1950 to introduce value-added tax, but it was not fully implemented until 1954, as I said. There is one state that the US state Michigan used the additive direct method between 1953 and 1967, and it also had and it was called the business activity tax. It had a very low tax rate, and it had a short comeback in 1975, and then it disappeared. And then value-added tax has spread, and what we do have is the European system that has spread over the world, but then there has been new systems out of the European system. But the European system is like the origin for all value-added tax system of today. So first, the value-added tax spread then from France to the Ivory Coast and Senegal, and then Brazil and Denmark introduced value-added tax. Sweden was quite early, 1969. And then we had Norway in 1970, and also in 1970, all the EU or European Community member states were obliged to have implemented the European system. Then it spread to in 1970s to many Latin American countries, 1977 to South Korea. And that is quite interesting, actually. I had a research project together with a South Korean researcher, and what we looked at then was I had heard, which sparked my interest for this, that South Korea took over the European system, like just copied it, like a legal transplant, as we talk in sometimes in legal theory. So they just copied the system, the European system. And then I had also heard that they didn't touch, because in both in Korea and Japan, they are very cautious in doing things with the value-added tax, because they are afraid that it will affect the economy, the public economy, negatively. So I had also heard that, well, nothing had happened after that. So I thought that, oh, this is interesting. I wonder, what happens with the tax system, value-added tax system, if you just take it over in the 1970s and you just don't touch it? So how would the European system system be in a completely different system, and if it wouldn't have developed at all. So we made a research project on that, and first to look about if it was true that it was only just copied from Europe, and how that process was, and so, and it was copied from Europe. And then we looked at, well, how was value-added tax in South Korea in 1977, and how was it? Is it now? So it was a lot of work, but it was a good, very interesting for me as a value-added tax researcher. Well, 1985, then New Zealand introduced value-added tax, and New Zealand has a much simpler system. I'm not sure, I haven't dived into the Seychellois system, value-added tax system yet. So I'm not sure where from where your value-added tax system stems. And does anyone know? Like,
From the British and Australians.
Oh yeah. Because then you have the system that comes originally from New Zealand, and then to Australia, and then South Africa as well has a similar system with and they call it the general sales tax, don't they? Yes, GST. But it's a much more simple, a much cleaner system than we have. Much better, I would say. All right, and then we had, well, this is how it spread further then, and I don't think, I'm not sure about Qatar, what happened there actually, if they succeeded. They aimed to implement it in 2021, but I'm not really sure. So up to 1967, there were like two different value-added tax families, two different kinds of value-added tax: the French system and the Michigan system. That were the only ones that were in place. And then, if you look at the value-added tax systems that there were in the 1980s, well, then there was only the European-based system that has spread. But now it is considered to be like three different value-added taxes families: the European one, and the so-called new value-added tax family, to which you belong then, with New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and other countries. So originally from Europe, but a simpler system, because the European system is quite complex, which is not how a value-added tax system should be. And then Japan then has a system of its own. Well, the economic significance then of value-added tax. Well, the value-added tax revenues have remained stable in OECD countries between 2018 and 2020. So it's on average 6.7% as a share of GDP. It accounts for 1/5 of the total tax revenues on average. Well, maybe we don't need to go so much into detail with that. I will just I take the significance of value-added tax for the EU budget, and this is also quite interesting with the value-added tax, because the EU member states, they contribute to the EU budget based on their value-added tax resource base. And that means that if one EU country, for instance, have a too narrow tax base, so for instance they tax too little simply, then they are not only required to correct their value-added tax but they can also be obliged to pay an extra membership fee to the EU, because they have not contributed enough to the EU by having a too narrow tax base. Yeah, I think that is it a bit. Yeah. Yes, we have our 27 EU member states, one value-added tax system, but not everything is harmonized in detail, which also makes the system quite complex. I was asked to teach value-added tax law in Austria like 10 years ago. And I thought that, well, the German language, that is a little bit difficult, but if I practice enough, I had basic German language. So, but if I prepare myself enough, then that should be all right. And then I thought that, well, and I know a lot of value-added tax and a lot about the European system, so it shouldn't be that difficult. But then when I did it the first time, then the students were like raising their hands and said that, no, but doesn't it work like this in Austria? So they had so many special rules on special Austrian rules. And I think that we have a lot of special Swedish rules as well. And it's possible according to the EU directive. Luckily, I somehow managed to do it good enough. So I was allowed to come back the next year and the next year after that. And I think the third time, then I felt quite confident also on the Austrian system. But there are bigger differences than you might expect in a harmonized country, harmonized system. I will just, I have 2 more slides about value-added tax. And I will first, just to have everyone on board, go through very quickly how the value-added tax works. And I mean, if you work with, if you're, for instance, do your research in accounting or something, or in tax, then of course this is very basic. But I'm just going to just go through it quickly. So here I have 3 companies. I have the wholesaler A, the retailer B, and the consumer C. All right. So if A here sells goods for 100,000, could be rupees. No, I think it's Swedish, because we have a much higher tax rate. So it's Swedish crowns, because we have 25% as our standard rate for value-added tax. The European Union has in general quite high rates. I think the average is around 21% on the standard rate, and then we have several reduced rates. But this is Sweden, obviously, or Denmark, with 25% value-added tax. So wholesale A sells goods for 100,000, declares output value-added tax on the sales. And if wholesaler A hasn't had any acquisitions during this period, then it doesn't have anything to deduct. So value-added tax then paid to the tax authority will then be 25,000. All right, if retailer B then acquires goods for 100,000 plus the 25,000 of value-added tax, and retailer B is taxable for value-added tax purposes, and sells the same goods for 200,000, and has somehow then created a value added, so that B can sell the goods to a higher price, and then B acquired it. Then B declares output value-added tax and puts out value-added tax on the invoice to consumer C of 50,000, then 25% times 200,000. And what B pays to the tax authority is 50,000 minus 25,000, and that is also 25,000. And consumer C then acquires the goods for 200 plus 50,000 in value-added tax, and since C is a consumer, C cannot deduct any value-added tax, so C bears then the cost burden of the value-added tax, which is then the 50,000, and the value, those 50,000, they are not paid to the tax authority by C, but have been paid by A with 25,000 and by B with 25,000. So this shows then that the value-added tax is an indirect tax, so that the taxpayers are not the same who bears the cost burden of the tax. That is typical for value-added tax, but also for excise duties, for instance. So we can also see that it is like a, well, first of all, that the value added that is produced at each stage, that is what is paid, and that is achieved by that you deduct the input value added tax from the output value added tax, and also that the wholesaler A and retailer B, that they share the liability to pay the tax, and that actually makes the value added tax a little bit less sensitive to tax fraud. It is sensitive to tax fraud, but not, for instance, if retailer B for some reason would not pay any value added tax, and still wholesaler A would pay its part, so that you share the liability to pay the tax to the tax authority. Okay, the sources of value-added tax in the European Union, and those are the ones that we are looking at in the POLINE project. Then, to some extent, it's since we have the directive and also regulation here, which is the basis for the value-added tax, the legal basis for it. Then we also have case law from the Court of Justice of the European Union, and that is also what we are analyzing then in the project. The interaction between EU law and domestic value-added tax law, if you're not familiar with the EU system, it might be a little bit confusing how it works. But we have a doctrine called indirect effect, which requires national courts as organs of the member state responsible for fulfillment of EU obligations to interpret domestic law consistently with directive and other EU law sources, including the case law from the Court of Justice of the European Union. So this doctrine then achieves indirectly through the technique of judicial interpretation of domestic law the result obtainable through the doctrine of direct effect of directives. And this is that if a member state has not implemented a directive, and that has something that, or that directive includes something that is beneficial for the individuals and companies, then the individuals and companies can choose to apply the directive instead of the less favorable national law. So that is a direct effect of directives. So in case of lacking direct effect, the national court must make every effort to interpret domestic law consistently with the EU directive. And that makes then the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union very important. Magnus, now it's you. Legal.
It's me now.
Now it's you, because this is what you're working on right now in the project, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I said when I presented the project from the beginning, it's about finding legal principles. And if you are to find a legal principle, then you need to decide what is a legal principle. Otherwise, it's really hard to find. When we are talking about law, we could say like this, that we have legal rules. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We'll come back to that, but we have legal rules and then we also have principles, and that's a difference. So the challenge for the project is to find these VAT principles. And there are, of course, a number of them, but we have started looking at principle of fiscal neutrality, right of deduction credit, and this is the basic principle for the system as such as Elenore presented, that it is not the purpose that the taxable person actually is the tax cost bearer, at the end of the day it's the consumer, and by that the system must be neutral depending on what kind of business operations that you're actually conducting. We have a principle of destination principle, places supply transaction, connects to the part of who should be taxable for a certain transaction, and that also relates here to the origin principle, place of supply and transaction. That's different way to actually decide who is the taxable person or not for a specific transaction. On top of that, we also have EU general law principles, anti-abuse principle. That's a general principle about that the VAT system shouldn't be possible to use for achieving different tax benefits and so on. So to prevent abusive behavior, tax evasion. Then we also have principle of legitimate expectations. This is principle based on that the taxpayer should, to some extent, understand what will happen if I act in a certain way, and what could I expect from the legal system and from the transaction, how it should be taxed in the future when it's been conducted. And then we have a principle of legality in tax law, and that's a general principle by which it connects to the prior principle. Actually, it's about tax certainty, that you should know how a certain transaction falls out, if it's taxable or not taxable. And legality very often comes back to rules, that there are certain tax rules and that you could some way get knowledge about it, and by that also get knowledge about how to behave to comply with the system. National constitutional principles is that.
Yeah. I'm not on the mic. Ja, men det finns ju också sådana som kan använda.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Principle based on the constitution and based on the fact that tax is some kind of burden, and then you need to protect the taxpayers as well in different ways. But how do we identify a principle? And this comes back to the basics of the legal area, because it's rather easy to understand and remember that we have legal rules, and the most normal rule that we think of it, at least if you from a legal system as Sweden, is actually that written rules. They are rather easy to identify, statutes, acts. If a principle could be said as working as something that is more or less, while a rule is either or. So a rule is something that is either applicable or non-applicable. Then you can say for a computer, a legal rule is actually easy to identify because it works on the same thing. Program languaging works always also in the same thing. It's based on rules. And the basic rule for a computer is either or, 0 or 1, on and off. A principle that is more or less. You could comply with it partly, or it could be partly applicable. Then it's a little bit harder for a computer to identify. So what the project will try to do is try to find methods to recognize the principle in the system. So startup of the project was actually to identify, or is to identify, principles in the respective legal systems. And this comes back so that even if we are members of the same union, even if we have the same EU legislation directive of VAT, there are still unique legal systems, and we look at these questions in different ways.
Can I just ask a question about, if you refer back to the previous thing there? A rule is either or, since one of the principles is more or less. Now, if computer is going to identify and interpret a principle, since a computer can only say 0 or 1, doesn't then the principle risk becoming a rule?
Risk becoming
a rule?
Yeah, you could say that it could become a rule to some extent. Then we come to which kind of technology you will use to try to identify the rules. I would say that even if it's not, I would say that, and I will come back to that as well, that we are talking about generative artificial intelligence, actually, because that could, what we can say about that technology is that that could imitate human behavior. And it's probably a question of doing that. And there's a lot of challenges with it. But you are correct. If you look at hard-coded program language, then the principle will become a yes or no.
Well,
and by that rule.
AI as well, we can take face recognition, for example. They've been applying systems whereby they look at faces and they look at the likelihood that you're a criminal.
Yeah.
And on that basis, they decide that on the basis of the prison population.
Yeah.
Now, of course, humans can do that because we can say, okay, there's a likelihood, but then we can use our intelligence and our experience to see whether the likelihood is likely or not. Whereas a computer obviously doesn't do that. So the stereotype, in a sense, gets strengthened by the AI because it doesn't have the moral intelligence of human beings or something like that.
Yeah, Mats.
I can add in there as well, but I mean, this is only what gives you, it's what gives you what is a rule and a principle, but it's, if you look at value-added tax principles, how they are formulated, then they are very loose to rules as well, so that you either comply or not comply with the principle.
Right.
And I think that comes a little bit to your next slide, isn't it?
Yeah, I only say to Mats, I hope we'll get the chance to discuss your view of intelligence in the future even more, because I disagree a little bit with you about it. What is intelligence? All right. Well, different legal system treats principles differently. And I think that Sweden is a rather good choice compared to the other two jurisdictions that are in the project, and compared to EU law as well. Our system is what we call the mixed legal system. It's actually based on statutes very much. We still have a living case law, but the case law is more interpretative. The Supreme Court doesn't actually create legal rules or maybe legal principles, but it is important for understanding the law. The system is that we have very few court cases compared with many other countries. It's only cases that are of interest for the interpretation of law, actually, that's normally reaches the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court very seldom handles cases that are wrongly decided in the lower courts. That's not a situation, but you have the right to get a trial at the Supreme Court. Our laws are very often really short. Tax laws are a little bit of exception, but compared to many other countries, even our tax statutes are rather short. So what we could say is that the material, underlying material is, that's rather thin, to be honest, if we look at the data. If we look at Hungary and Italy, it's a Bulgaria and Italy.
It applies for Hungary as well, by the way.
They are civil law systems. They have much more structured approach to law than we have in Sweden. They have, as we understand, very high number of cases, especially in Bulgaria, in this area. So from the very start point, our assumption is that we have much more data in Bulgaria and Italy and at the European level that we have compared in Sweden, and that will of course create a problem. So that's this is the basics for the principles and our start point.
May I ask you just, do you have a mixed legal system here, or do you have a common law system?
We have mixed.
Yes, I believe so.
Right, that was the principles, and then
This is your part as well.
yeah, I know that. And now the part of computer science in the project. I'm not a computer scientist. It's not that, but I have some use of. So it's about how to apply AI, machine learning, and NLP, natural language processing, into this algorithm. And I would say that you should most likely also add on generative artificial intelligence on it. But at the same time, you could say that that is a part of the NLP science. What is artificial intelligence? This is one definition. It's the simulation of human intelligence. As I see it, from my perspective, it is not necessarily human intelligence. I think you could actually take away human. It's a question of if you buy or with a machine could create something that can make independent decisions, or rather could make independent statements. Because if we look at the legal side of using artificial intelligence, at least now, it's always results in some kind of statement. Normally a written statement on a screen by which you ask the system in question, and by that you hopefully get an answer. And normally you are talking about computer systems. In the project, they have identified that they are not sure yet which kind of program language will be used for this AI. Python is the most common, as I know, that you are using for this. But we have a number of other languages as well that could be used. An important part of the project is this part that comes after collecting data, because first we are identifying these principles. Next phase will be to actually collect data. The data, as we said, will be case law in general. So it's cases that are to be collected. They should be digital in collection. Otherwise, we need to scan them and interpret them so they become digital in the next step. Finally, it will be subject to some kind of machine learning. We are trying to learn the AI system to understand what it will look for. And those machine learnings, ways to machine learning, they are either supervised or unsupervised. And I think that the one that will be used in this case is firstly supervised machine learning. And by that, really simplified, you could say that the person who is going to train the AI are labeling the data before it is injected into the system by the critical words, hashtags that we need to identify in the system. And that is going back to identifying principles. By that we have the possibility to label the data in a correct way.
And we say that here we also have, well, we have the challenge that we have not so many cases from the Supreme Administrative Court, but in Italy they have difficulties to access all the cases, even though they have more case law, they have problems to get the hands on the data. So that is much more a challenge there. But Bulgaria, they seem to have a lot of cases from the Supreme Courts and easy to get the hands on them. I think that actually that is answers that they have already collected, that already have the cases collected. But I was quite surprised that Italy had problems actually to access them, because it's quite often nowadays that the Supreme Court cases, they are published on the internet, their references, and that is problem.
All right. So the technologies based on NLP, natural language processing, that is the rather old technology for letting a computer handle our language. So it's actually fed with data that is text data, and it's interpretation data. The last level or status of the technology is what we call generative artificial intelligence. And if I say ChatGPT, most people knows what's it about, actually. And in general, if we're talking about this kind of technology, when it comes to legal applications, we are well informed of a couple of things. Firstly, at the launch of ChatGPT 4, which is the latest model by OpenAI, they actually tested it on the American bar exam, one of the bar exams. And this is the interesting thing. The algorithm passed the exam by 10% best in top. So we know that this kind of technology is good of interpreting legal texts and giving answers on legal questions. At the same time, if I try to use this model on Swedish law, the result will be rich. It's become much better by time. It was a disaster 1 year ago. Now it becomes better, much better. And assume if you do it the same thing on the laws in the Seychelles, I think the result will be rather bad. And then you ask the question, why? Why is it this differences? Yeah, English is a large language. Swedish is a small language. American law is present on the internet to a huge extent. Swedish law is not that much present. Actually, the information about Swedish law is very much behind paywalls. So you have not openly access to it. OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 is trained on a predefined data set extracted from the internet, open sources. And that's when we have the answer. That's the reason for the algorithm to be capable to be top 10% to pass the US bar exam. It had sufficient data to be trained on.
I can say also that regarding this, when we applied together with the other universities about this project, for the first time, that was 2019 or something. So then there was no trace of ChatGPT and so on, and then we reapplied because we didn't get to the grant first time, so we tried again, and then we got it like 2022 then. Yeah. So, and I mean, a lot has changed when it comes to ChatGPT and the techniques has changed a lot already. So I'm quite happy that this project is fairly short, I would say, because I think that next year, when we will be, or by the end of next year, when we will be done with the project, then we can still contribute with new science.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think we are only in the beginning looking at this kind of question. And that goes back to when you look at what is the generative artificial intelligence technology based on and what makes it so interesting. It is based on machine learning, a lot of text. You could use whatever text you like, of course. What it also is trained to do is to recognize a certain pattern of words, the order of words, and the likeliness of what kind of words that will be the output, and how those words, according to a statistic model, should be arranged. So it's not, to be honest, the model doesn't think at all. It is no human thinking behind it. But at the same time, it creates unique answers. The output is unique. So you can't actually take these kind of answers and try to see whether they are copied or not, because they aren't copied. They are original answers. And it seems to like that they are very correct nowadays, as long as the algorithm has sufficient data at the bottom to the training. All right.
Should we do this one together?
Yeah.
All right. Yes, so then we shall then take a look at the relation between value-added tax legal principles and AI in the POLINE context. So yeah, we have already touched upon this, that AI is already very good at answering questions regarding different text, among them legal material. So what is then our scientific contribution? Well, we will do some fine-tuning in this, since we are going to train the algorithms on specific data, and also to check what comes out. See if when the algorithm identifies a value-added tax principle, and see, well, is this an accurate answer, and see if we need to maybe supply more data, or so We hope to contribute to research on the relation between national law and EU law in the field of value-added taxes, where we look at both the national case law and the EU case law, and also in a setting that I haven't seen it combined before with Bulgaria, Italy, and Sweden, and they represent a little bit different traditions. That Bulgaria is a little bit more Eastern Europe, Italy South, and we are North Europe. Well, we will contribute to research on value-added tax principles. What is the value-added tax principle? And also provide accurate and high-quality data for machine learning in the field of value-added tax. But we also want to take a little bit a look on the larger picture on AI, digitalization, and taxes.
Should I take this?
You can start.
Yeah, a larger picture. In 2020, what's that? OECD, yeah, I think it was 2020. OECD launched this discussion paper idea that it was called Tax Administration 3.0. Tax administration, I will come back to that. Tax Administration 3.0 is the view from OECD's side about how taxes will function in the future. We also have the VIDA proposal from the EU Commission that is about real-time reporting for VAT and e-invoicing. So we are talking about the tax authority becomes much faster to collect taxes and doing it in real time.
Yeah, and it's already the real-time reporting of value-added tax that big companies need to report their transactions almost instantly to the tax authorities. Some countries already apply that for larger companies, for instance, or some countries apply that for larger companies, for instance, Spain. But the idea here is that big companies, they should use e-invoicing and based on according to a standard template, and according to the information that they have in those e-invoices will then be submitted within a couple of days to the tax authorities. And that will reduce the risk of cross-border fraud that we have quite a lot in value-added tax, and also simplifies other things.
Yeah, and we could also, in a larger picture, see that Sweden and a lot of other countries actually has already a lot of tax decisions that are made automatically, and the use of AI tools for different kind of tax auditing is increasing rapidly. Actually,
yeah,
we have some countries, I think it's like Poland, that's a really advanced system to try to identify tax fraud, and then with algorithm identifies a possible threat, it actually shut down taxpayers' bank accounts.
Yeah, it freezes it.
Freezes it for 72 hours to get the possibility to investigate what's happening.
Yeah. And I can also say that automated tax decisions, I don't know if you have that here on the Seychelles, but in Sweden we have had that for a very long time. In value-added tax it was introduced already in the 1970s. Then we still submitted the value-added tax returns on papers, but it was read by a machine, and then we had an automated tax decision. And already in 1994 we had, for all personal income tax returns, we also have automated decisions based on the tax return then. And then of course you have the possibility to appeal and have a person reassessing it, and so, but very many tax decisions are made by machines in our country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And yes, to give you a picture of the the future and what we're trying to be a part of.
Yeah, this is the vision then.
And this is a vision for the Tax Administration 3.0 report. And what it's all about, it's all about building systems by which taxation becomes an integrated part of the taxpayer's system, life, and business operations. What actually OECD states in this report is that taxation and tax payment, so we are talking both about the taxation and payments as such, should be a seamless part of natural life. You shouldn't even notice that you have been taxed. And this is, of course, means that the system must be fully digital. It must be very, very much reporting in the system, and you will need different kind of AI based tools to analyze the transaction.
Yeah. So we can look at the example as well. Here about Smart Falcon's business solutions are provided by government trusted vendors. Tax is thus fully embedded within Smart Falcon's digital business solutions in all countries in which they operate. The business systems are updated with current tax relevant rules, algorithms, and data from government platforms before business transactions are completing, leading to fewer mistakes and unintended errors. Smart Falcon's tax decisions are supported by AI in the business system. Tax is assessed, reported, and collected automatically in line with the different tax types and rules in the different countries. Even if periods, rates, etc. can differ, this is still supported by a standard reporting format for all the countries in which the company operating. The business system is able to show an update overview of the tax status, positions, and risks for the whole company. So I don't know, is this vision far away or is it close? It is a vision from the OECD.
I think it's.
Yeah.
It depends on. I think it depends on if you look at the technology side or if you look at the business side. From technology-wise, we could do it, but I don't know if people accept it. All right.
Yeah, that was our presentation. So thank you very much. Well, we're really curious to hear your reactions or input, or if you have any maybe experience from similar research and so, and have any takeaways for us while working with this project. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's very informative. Well, I come from a different part of this global south, right? From close to India, South Asia. So value added tax is added to like 1.6 billion people in South Asia. And it reduces the breadbasket. Even a simple egg commodity is being taxed, so it hits the poorest man. Okay. So systems are required to separate this. So in that light, I'm just asking that. And it also impacts the political, socio-economical, and topples down when you do too much of that. And the World Bank as well as IMF gives loans to these developing countries based on that. You have to add the tax. So it hits the common man, not the top tier, right? So your information kind of about that and how to segregate or separate these sections and not affect the common man is one of the key sensitive human rights areas that needs to be addressed in this context, especially when it comes to developing issues.
Yeah. And there I think that we have, it probably works very very differently, because I understand that even here at the Seychelles, the threshold for paying value-added tax is really high. It's like, is it 2 million or 5 million? 5 million and going down to 2 million, I think, rupees. And in Sweden, our threshold for paying value-added tax for the small companies is if you earn like 180,000 rupees on a yearly basis, or it is even less now. It's around 120,000 rupees, but it will be risen to 180,000. So we have a very, very broad tax base. And from our perspective, that is considered as the secret behind Sweden's success story to collect so much tax revenue. But I understand that. I mean, if you're if in a country where the resources are more scarce, maybe that if you need to add value-added tax, and even if the tax rate is lower, if the farmer needs to add that on when he's selling eggs, for instance, and that could probably it could be the last. It could be very difficult for that farmer. So I think that you need to have like an accurate threshold for paying value-added tax, which works in the respective country.
No, countries, the whole region has been affected by that. No.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
I said 1.6 billion people are being taxed in our region.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a collaboration in the field of value-added tax, like between the different?
Central bank or the state will have an agreement with the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund based on neoliberal economic concept like Punch Washington consensus or Paris Club, and to reduce the deficit, they give the loan on based on that, so the tax is imposed to everyone.
Yeah.
So that destroys us.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much for your eye-opening presentation. I'm just asking the technical problem regarding what focuses do you use for the tagging purposes? For the tagging purposes, for the NLP, what focuses do you use for you develop your own focuses?
Do you mean the taxonomy we're using, or?
No, for the NLP, natural language.
Yeah.
So you read the as a text, then you need to tag it. You need to put a tag.
Tags for the data, The tagging,
You use existing focuses, or you create the focus?
I think they are, now that is very much between, but I think that we are trying to develop this tags, what we need to find of data. And that is a reason for us to start to look at what is principle. And from that definition, be capable to extract the tagging method, or to develop the tagging method to get it correct, because I don't think it's actually exists anyone yet that is general common.
But isn't that the whole purpose of the project, to create the tagging system?
You can say that's basic, because it all ends up there. And if we do it correctly, and provided that we have sufficient amount of data, then we will be successful.
Yes, and then we can also use it, or we can use it for other fields of law, not only for value-added tax. We just chose value-added tax because, as Magnus mentioned, because it's harmonized. So we have similar systems, and we have a lot of data. I mean, from the Court of Justice of the European Union, there are more than 1,000 cases on value-added tax. So we have a lot there, and then also adding on those three national supreme administrative or supreme tax courts. I think that we will yeah, so that is a reason for choosing it, but the application hopefully doesn't end there.
If you permit another question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I don't know much about the law side, but your decision is based on the past cases you mentioned about. At the same time, you say that you are using the probabilistic statistical model. So how you are going to tackle to generate the new information based on the facts?
Yeah, you mean that if law, or do you mean that if law has developed, if we start early? No?
The system by itself generates information.
Yeah.
And that information will, of course, and I assume that you come back to the problem with bias and noises in the material. And that is a really problem. Of course, it's a really challenge when you are working with this kind of material. It's the same thing as we also start in other projects actually start to consider to try to create synthetic data to be used due to the lack of sufficient amount of data that we have in Sweden when it comes to legal matters. And then you also get the same problem that the data will, if you create synthetic data, it will be similar to the original data and it will have the same bias probably and the same kind of noise within the data. I don't know. Now I'm not a computer scientist, but from my point of view, I'm not that sure that you need a huge amount of data. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that I'm not sure that the problems with bias and so on are that big, because it's also rather easy to identify the bias. Bias is really easy to identify. You look at who is the normal lawyer who has produced the text in the bottom that is used for data, and then you can start to actually map out what kind of bias that you probably have in the data, and then compensate for that, like they did with self-driving cars and so on, to compensate for the lack of correctness in data in those machine learning processes, because you are aware of from the beginning what kind of bias you will actually run into. I mean, Sweden is really easy. We are talking about mid-aged white men who is written with this data at the bottom, and then you could of course try to compensate for that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. You talked about principles, right?
Okay.
And my question is in relation to two legal principles:
yes.
Legality and unjust enrichment.
Just
and from an African perspective, we have had countries that are charging value-added tax for locally produced goods without adding much value to those products. Is it legal, and does it not amount to unjust enrichment?
Oh, that is a good question. I would say that as long as there is a law, it is probably legal in some sense. But of course, if you want to, I mean, it depends on what's in the law, I would say. If you have quite a formal, like positivistic view on the law, I mean, if it says in the law that it should be taxed and the law has come in a correct, has been enacted in a correct way, then I suppose it's legal, and you could say that it is in line with the principle of legality. But you could also say that, well, but this is a value-added tax. It's a value-added. If there is no value, and that is also in the law because it is the Value-Added Tax Act. And that is, so you could also argue against that it is in line with the principle of legality. And I think that that is a little bit shows the characteristics of a principle, doesn't it? I mean, the principle of legality. In the end, it will be the Supreme Court that decides that is this legal or is it not legal in case, is it in line with the principle of legality, depending on the understanding of the principle of legality of the judges in the Supreme Court. But you could argue in both directions.
Yeah, I get you, but my problem is that reason is the soul of the law.
Yeah.
And when there is no reason, then the law must fall into disuse. If you did not add any value, there mustn't be any reason why you should be charging value-added tax. Why should you charge tax for something that does not have value that has been added to it?
Yeah, I agree with you. But in the end, I think that you will probably, or I don't know how it would be decided, how such a case would be decided in the end. And I suppose, but that also depends on which approach you have to law. I suppose if you have the positivistic way, so that you say that, well, all right, if the Supreme Court has had its saying, well, then that is the law. If you have another, maybe more natural law approach, that you mean that, well, there is a law also that exists in spite of what the Supreme Court says. Then, of course, you can say that, well, the Supreme Court says this, but the Supreme Court is wrong. This is not how it.
In most instances, we have had laws at the national level that says it should be taxed, but without adding much value.
Yeah.
And it depends with how the Supreme Court's approach or the High Court's approach to handling the case. Sometimes courts of law, they tend to simply say, is there a rule of law that says it should be taxed? If so, cut it, question, end of story.
Yeah.
You have to pay tax. But again, courts of law must interpret these tax principles in a manner that does not result in injustice. Because at the end of the day, you are taxing something which should not be taxed simply because there is a rule of law.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it is a high risk if the in legitimacy, if the court follows the law too strictly, but in an unjust way. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know how much time we have because
we have
Yes, I haven't heard you talking about translation difficulties or that type of thing, with the fact that you're in different countries with different languages. So we just take it that that's a given?
Yes, we will not translate. We will use the original language. Yeah, but it can easily be translated. It's
AI within the text, there's no translation issues.
Yeah, I think in general, when you're working with computers, the language by itself is not a problem. That is more connected with the amount of data. And by this English normally is the best language to use. But if you are looking at Swedish law, it doesn't matter because there are not that much about Swedish law in English either. So it's,
Bulgaria.
Yeah, so I think that's, if you turn it the other way around, it is actually better to stay at Bulgarian when you are looking at Bulgarian data, because most of the data is in Bulgarian, and then it's easier to interpret. So I think that's the main reason.
Yeah. But we have that. We discussed that. We asked the same question to the computer scientists, but they were quite clear on that they would stay in the national language.
Yeah.
Max, can I just have 30 seconds?
Yes, you can have that.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is project is a work in progress.
Yeah.
Now, what I would like to know, Seychelles is a small country. It's very easy for you to actually look at our laws, and also it's very easy for us to work together to come to a conclusion. What I would like to know is, once you have finalized your research findings and you have your formulas, the algorithms, everything, could we perhaps have your knowledge come to Seychelles and help us also with this same issue?
Yeah, I'm completely positive that we could do that, and also that would be very beneficial for the project, because they were really, we told our colleagues then in Bologna, who are managing our webpage, that we were going to present the project now today, and they straight away they linked it to your webpage. And on the project page, and also sent out an email that, oh, this is really, really good if you go out and tell about the project, and also told the other project members that they should inform so that they could put it on the web page and create added value. So of course so that is one reason. So it would be very beneficial for the project, and we would love to come back. And we also will do them.
And I also could say that I think this is one of the items that we will bring up with the Minister of Finance.
Yeah.
I was just going to finish on that note, that just this morning we had those discussions with the Minister of Finance, had webinars and workshops together with the Ministry to explore how Seychelles can benefit from this type of technology.
And we're hoping that they're also watching as well. We send them the link.
Yeah, we sent them the link as well. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
I'm sure we could go on
Yeah.
for a long time.
And thank you for having us. It's a great pleasure.